In today's lecture, we will understand about the XSD for complex elements. Now, first thing is that what do you understand by a complex element? So, if an element contains other elements or some other attributes, then such an element is called a complex element. For example, we may have 4 different kinds of the complex element. First one is the empty element, because the element itself does not contain any data, but it may contain further properties like the attributes, or further we can add on some nested elements to it. So that is why it can be an empty element. Moreover, the element can also contain other elements, as I have already told you. Third option is that the elements that contain only text. So if the element contains the text, it can be a complex element. And lastly, that the elements that contain both elements as well as the text, those are called the complex elements. So we will be discussing each of them one by one. Now, the example of the first complex element is product. Here you see, you have been given only the attribute product ID, and its value is 1345. So this particular element is a complex XML element, and it can be represented in the XSD format. Similarly, we have this employee element, which further contains 2 nested elements. Therefore, it is a complex element. Next example is for this particular element food, which contains the attribute as well as some text, both of them together. Therefore, it is a complex element. And lastly, there is a complex element description, which contains both the element, that is the date element, as well as the text. So both these things have been combined together to form the text of description. So all these are the examples of the complex elements. Now let us see how to define a complex element. Now you see, if you have a element employee like this, and you have further sub elements, first name, last name, which contains some text also, then what we can do, we can define this complex element in the XML schema like this. Now the first option can be that yes, the schema will state that the element name employee is a complex one. Why? Because it contains 2 sub elements, and therefore we will say that it is a complex type. It contains 2 elements within itself. This means that there is a sequence of elements inside this element employee. Now the first sub element, whose name is first name, here you see first name is the name of the sub element. It's an element type, and it is of string data type because it contains a string John, which is the first name of the employee. And similarly, a last name, which is again a string type. So that's why the element employee is a complex type. It contains a sequence of sub elements, and those 2 sub elements are first name, last name. Both are of string data type. Another way of expressing the same thing in the XML schema can be that you define your own user-defined data type. So here the user-defined data type person info is there for the element employee, and now we can say that this person info complex element, complex type therefore, and it again contains a sequence of sub elements. And what are those sub elements? Those sub elements are the first name and the last name. Rest of the schema design will remain the same. Now if you use the method described above, then you can use that person info in different elements. In order to define different complex elements, you may further use the same person info. Let's see how. If the employee is of a person info data type, then we can define the student as well as the member also to be of person info type. That means that both will contain the first name and the last. So here we can have the complex type name person info, which is a sequence of elements first name last name. Therefore, this schema definition states that the person info is a user defined data type which can have the elements of employee, student as well as member. So all these three elements contain the same two sub-elements, first name and the last name. Now you see, you have used now the reusability process for the schema design. Now this reusability will be a further use when you will have a scenario in which the employee contains first name last name and the another element which contains the full person name. Now the full person name will contain the first name last name as well as some other sequence of elements, and what we can do, we can define that is an extension. Now let us consider a scenario where this user name, this user defined data type can be of further use to express the schema. Now in this example, it has been taken that employee element is a full person info, and the full person info contains the sequence of sub-elements first name last name. Now when we are defining another complex type full person info, what we are doing is it's a complex type and it is an extension to the person info. So the full person info contains the person info elements as well as other sequence. And what is that other sequence? You have added the other sequence of elements of address, city and country. So we have mentioned in this way that this element full person info, which is a user defined data type, it's a complex extension, and that's why we have written XS colon extension to the base user type in person info. So that is how we can formulate the extension of the user defined data types in XSD schema. I hope it was clear to you. Thank you very much.